The 1970s, a decade of social change. The 1970s were a time of major political, economic, and cultural significance. People finally started looking after the environment, citizens voted for more open government, and oil became a more looked after resource. The hippies of the 1960s gave way to the environmentalist movement. Saigon fell in 1975, which reunited Vietnam into a communist state. Inflation went up, as did the prices of oil. Movies such as The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Star Wars, and Jaws came out, as did the Jackson 5, John Lennon, and Pink Floyd. All of these important things helped create a unique decade that will be remembered for years to come. Richard Nixon was voted into presidency by appealing to the middle class who preferred keeping things the way they used to be and cutting back on new democratic policies. Although he was cutting many programs that were he also proposed the Family Assistance Plan. This would give families a minimum income to work off of. Unfortunately for Nixon, the Senate rejected his idea. Keeping with his stopping of liberal policies, he also appointed conservative justices to the Supreme Court. Nixon also wanted to create a balance of power between the world's major powers, the Soviet Union, Western Europe, Japan, China, and of course the United States. He went on a trip to China to help ease the tensions, as well as a trip to the Soviet Union. He also tried to limit the number of nuclear missiles and stop the arms race between the countries. Richard Nixon became obsessed with winning the election his re-election at all costs. Using criminal activity and later covering up their crimes, the Nixon administration became involved in what is now known as Watergate. By spying on the Democrats in their offices in the Watergate building, Nixon created a scandal that he could never recover from. When caught, he resigned rather than becoming impeached, which would have caused more national embarrassment. Before Watergate, Richard Nixon went into presidency with a troubled economy. With the Vietnam War, there was high inflation and unemployment due to the high government spending needed for the war. Using his government control to stop inflation, he put a wage, price, and rent freeze that was considered a very drastic step. He was forced to take these steps if he was going to have a chance at winning the 1972 election, which he went on to do. With the formation of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the price of gasoline was going up even during an already hurting U.S. economy. With this Arab oil embargo and price hikes, the United States needed to change how it received their energy. Nixon signed a bill that would create an oil pipeline to bring oil from Alaska. Gerald Ford, a Republican, pardoned Richard Nixon after his Watergate scandal. This upset many of the public as they wanted to see him charged, but Ford defended his actions by saying that he wanted to heal the wounds of the past. He also gave partial amnesty to draft dodgers and let them spend 2 years of public services in order to return to America. Ford vetoed more bills than any other president. Also, under his leadership, the United States-Soviet Union relationship began to crumble. The election of 1976. Jimmy Carter, who won over Gerald Ford, as he successfully promoted his born-again Christian faith as well as his very open policies. Many people hoped that this new Democratic president would be able to reverse the public's mistrust of the government. On his first day of office, he granted a full pardon for the Vietnam draft dodgers and started up a radio and television call-in sessions to keep in touch with the U.S. citizens. Carter also changed from Nixon's former policies to emphasize more moral principles and respects for human rights. While trying to help the economy, Carter created a corporate tax cut and many policies. Unfortunately, this caused even more inflation and disappointment. With the nation still dealing with an oil problem, Carter started the Department of Energy to hopefully help the energy crisis that was still going on. After a revolution in Iran, the U.S. had another oil crisis, which caused gas stations to close. Earth Day started in the 1970s as concerned citizens worried about the quality of their air and environment. Congress enacted the EPA as well as OSHA, which gave the government regulation over the environment and workplace policies, both of which are still in use today. Culture. African Americans had more political office spots than ever before. With the legacy of the civil rights movement, more minorities had more power than they ever had. Although many positive things occurred from the continuation of civil rights, there was still some backlash from white people. Women had more public policy enacted as Roe v. Wade gave more access to abortion, as well as the Equal Rights Amendment. Home movies, printers, emails, and video games all got their start in the 1970s. There were dozens of popular movies that people still watch today that were released in the 1970s. Godfather Parts 1 and 2, Star Wars, Rocky, The Muppet Movie, Diamonds Are Forever were just a few of the very popular movies that came out in this time. Famous musicians such as the Jackson 5, John Lennon, Willie Nelson, Pink Floyd, The Police, Bob Dylan, Queen, the Eagles, AC/DC, Journey, Rush, Boston, Aerosmith, and the Beatles were all a few of the very popular musicians and artists of this time. Along with all of the famous artists, there are many famous books that came out at this time that are still read today. The Lorax, The Shining, The Stand, The Princess Bride, Where the Sidewalk Ends, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, The Westing Games, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy were a few of the popular books that came out in this time and have also recently been turned into movies. All of these things help define the unique culture of the 70s, and much of the 70s most popular cultural icons are still given today.